مرحبا بكم طلاب الخامس أعزائي طلاب المرحلة الخامسة. شلون صحتكم؟ إن شاء الله زينين. راح نشوف بهذه السلايدات القادمة بعض المعلومات عن الامبريشن فور كراون اند بريدج، وشلون ننقل هذا وضع الأسنان البريبير تيث والadjacent structures إلى dental laboratory for construction of a fixed crown and or a bridge. How to place a provisional restoration, a temporary restoration to cover the teeth while the fixed restoration is being constructed. مثل ما معروف بالنسبة لكم، الامبريشن هو عبارة عن negative likeness of the teeth and adjacent structures. شلون نعكس هذه الستراكشرز إلى impression material اللي ممكن تحافظ لي على تعطيني فد 3-dimensional reproduction of these tissues and structures in order to be transmitted to dental laboratory. That when will be poured, it will be going a working cast. The working cast is when we pour the negative likeness, which is the impression, the working cast will be produced, and it is a positive representation of the teeth and adjacent structures that will be transmitted for lab for construction of the prosthesis. The die is the representation of the prepared tooth only. The die, when we cut the representation of the prepared tooth in the working cast, it will be called the die. This is used for the delicate and the precise construction of the restoration. The impression should be easily sterilized, should have sufficient working time, should have dimensional stability in order to reproduce the dimensions and the relation between the teeth and adjacent structures carefully. It should have a tear resistance, that it will not be torn when we get it out from the undercut area and from the oral structures. It should be acceptable to the patient, should give clear details and readability. The manipulation and the mixing is easy. All these requirements are all these properties are required in the ideal impression material. Can be disinfected, and the cost also must be reasonable. We know from dental materials the types of impression materials, as you studied in the second stage. The impression materials are classified into elastic and non-elastic impression materials. The non-elastic impression materials are rigid and mostly used for edentulous areas, such as the impression plaster or impression compound or zinc oxide eugenol impression paste, and also we have impression waxes. While the elastic impression materials are used for dentulous areas, such as the construction of partial denture or for construction of a fixed bridge. The elastic impression materials are subdivided into hydrocolloids and the elastomers. The hydrocolloids are reversible and irreversible. The reversible is the agar-agar impression material used for construction of partial dentures, and the non-reversible type of elastic impression material is the alginate Irreversible means when it is mixed, it cannot be reused. Alginate is used for the impression for the removable partial dentures and cannot be used for the precise work of the fixed crowns and bridges. For fixed crowns and bridges, we need materials that is dimensionally stable and tear resistant and give precise details and representation of the fine details of the crown preparation, the finish line, and the adjacent structures. The elastomers are mainly the polyether, polysulfide, polysilicon impression materials. We have two types of polysilicon, which is the condensation silicone impression material and the addition silicone impression material. These depend on the polymerization reaction to form the mostly provided as a paste and depend on the polymerization to give the final consistency of the material. Can be divided into according to consistency and amount of filler into a delicate material, which is the light body, near liquid material, and we have the heavy body, which is a doughy material, and sometimes when it is used in one stage, it can be a consistency between these extremities, which is the medium consistency, which is called the regular body impression material. These materials, the first type of these materials is the polysulfide. Polysulfide impression materials depend on the polymerization of polysulfide polymer. The advantages is the resistance to tear, easy to be used, have some elastic properties, impression is made easily, can be used in undercut and pinhole area. The dimensional stability is better than hydrocolloid, better than the alginate, and it is cheap, least expensive material. The disadvantages is the bad odor of sulfide material and the stickiness of the material that make it messy and stain the clothing and the patient's skin. The polyether impression material is more precise. The polymerization of this material give no byproduct, so it give a dimensional stability. Polysulfide impression material give the a byproduct when it is polymerized. It release water vapor as a byproduct, so when it releases this vapor, it will collapse and shrink in size. The Polymerization reaction that give no byproduct will give a dimensionally stable material for impression. The advantages is that it is accurate. Material can be poured after a day from the impression, while polysulfide within 20 minutes must be poured. Setting time is short, so it is less discomfortable and give less irritation for the patient. The disadvantages is that it is stiff when it is set. It make it impossible to release the stone cast from the impression. The polysilicon is widely used. It is odorless, and the short setting time give good working time, 6 to 8 minutes. The disadvantages is that it is hydrophobic. It means when we pour the cast, we need sometimes a surfactant to attach the gypsum material to the impression material and give fine details. That means it has a poor wetting characteristics. Also, condensation silicone release byproduct in its polymerization reaction, which is the alcohol volatile vapor. This, when elaborate from the impression material, it shrink and give dimensional contraction. And as we said, the dimensional stability is very important for the impression material in order to give fine details about the sizing and the spaces, and when the sizing and the spaces of the impression and of the cast are precise, the insertion and the fitness of the restoration will be better. The revolution of condensation silicone gave the change in the chemical properties and gave the addition silicone. The addition silicone means that the polymerization reaction is a addition polymerization reaction, and the monomers are attached to each other without giving a byproduct. So the material will be dimensionally stable, can be poured even after a day from the impression, when impression is taken. Have the same properties of condensation silicone, but it has the advantage of greater dimensional stability. The working time is affected by temperature, because heat will increase the speed of polymerization reaction and give rapid setting. The set material is less rigid than polyether, so it is preferred on polyether. Addition silicone also is hydrophobic, so when it is poured with gypsum material, it must be sprayed by a surfactant of hydrophilic material. These were the main impression materials and their properties and advantages and disadvantages. Before now we go to the making of impression and the technique for making the impression. Before making the impression, we have to isolate, as we know, the fixed bridge is placed on a prepared teeth, and mainly the finish line between the prepared and unprepared tooth structure must be reflected carefully in the impression material and registered carefully. Saliva or blood will affect the impression material in these areas near the gingiva, so isolation must be done, and reflection of the gingiva and gingival separation must be done before taking the impression. This displacement of gingiva is divided into two ways. The mechanical, three ways. Maybe mechanical, maybe chemical, and maybe chemomechanical. It means the mixing of two techniques. The mechanical separation is made by retraction cords. The retraction cords are large size cords, can be placed for a while before taking the impression. Also, when we place temporary crown, before taking the impression, if we make the temporary crown long, it will reflect the gingiva, and sometimes we do preparation for a tooth, and after day or 2 days we complete the preparation of other abutment, and we place in this period we place a temporary crown on the prepared tooth in the first visit. The temporary crown, if it is long, it will cause a reflection of the gingiva during this period. Sometimes the retraction cord can be mixed with a vasoconstrictor material or a coagulative material. It make it chemomechanical, and this reflection is called chemomechanical reflection. It uses the medicated retraction cord. It may be mixed with vasoconstrictor like epinephrine, or a coagulative material such as ferric sulfate or aluminum chloride. These materials caused coagulation of the bleeding tiny blood vessels in the gingival sulcus, and prevent bleeding in the gingival sulcus during taking the impression. Sometimes we can reflect the gingiva by electrosurgery. Sometimes laser is done. Sometimes by gingival retraction paste. The impression techniques are divided into two main techniques, which are the single stage and the two stage. The single stage, for impression we have to the body of impression material must be built from heavy body impression, elastomeric impression material, and the area that will reflect the fine details of the teeth and the finish line and gingiva must be reflected by light body impression material. So, how to make the impression with two consistencies is the main problem in this classification into two techniques. The first technique, which is the single stage, use the impression syringe. The impression syringe will be loaded by the light body, and the heavy body will be placed in the tray. The light body will be injected on the gingival area, on the finish line and the prepared teeth, while the assistant is loading the tray with the heavy body. Then, after injection of light body, the heavy body will be placed on the arch, and two materials will set in the same time. So it is called the double mix, because in the same time you mix the light body, and another person like assistant or a colleague will mix the heavy body and place in the tray. And while you inject the light body, your assistant or colleague will give you the tray, and then will be placed on the light body before setting. Then the two consistencies and the two mixes are set evenly in the same time. They will result in the impression like this. The area of fine details reflected by light body and the main body of the impression is constructed from the heavy body. The two stage, when you don't have assistant and you don't have a colleague near you to help you in taking this type of impression. So you can take two-stage impressions. The two-stage impression means that you take impression by heavy body, then some amount of the impression material are cut in the area of the prepared teeth, loaded with heavy body, and the impression is replaced in the oral cavity, and this is called the putty wash technique and a two-stage impression technique. After you take the impression, we have to evaluate the reflection of the adjacent gingiva, the reflection of the finish line, and all adjacent structures you need to reflect a proper cast that is free from voids or bubbles. Impression materials should be sterilized or disinfected by some disinfectants. This table gives the proper disinfectant that will go and match the impression material. Mainly the disinfectant may be glutaraldehyde or the chlorine solution such as hypochlorite. The impression technique is placed in hypochlorite material for 5 to 10 minutes to be disinfected in order to give the proper cast, the working cast, that will be transmitted for the laboratory for construction of the restoration. After taking the impression, we have to cover the prepared teeth by a provisional restoration. It means a temporary crown or a bridge used to cover the prepared teeth, the abutment teeth, while the prosthesis is finished. In this period, that can be a week or 2 weeks, the prepared teeth are covered by the temporary restoration. The temporary restoration can be made by a material that easily constructed, and the good or strong mechanical properties are not needed because it is a temporary material used for a week or 2 weeks. The temporary crown give a large number of advantages, that it will protect the prepared tooth against biological irritation such as food or saliva, thermal isolation, and chemical isolation, protect the open dentinal tubules from irritation by acids, prevent the position change and tilting of the tooth because it will lose the contact with adjacent teeth and opposing teeth. Sometimes when the tooth is missing the contact with the opposing teeth in occlusion, may it go with over eruption and be longer. It gives mechanical support. Sometimes the tooth have large filling. After preparation, the filling may fracture, or the tooth itself may fracture because of the weakening of the preparation. So it provides mechanical support. In a preparation of anterior teeth, the shape and the aesthetic of anterior teeth will be not acceptable if it is not covered by a provisional or temporary restoration, and the protect dental tubules also from bacterial invasion. The requirements of the provisional restoration is that divided into biological, mechanical, and aesthetic. The biological is to protect the pulp, maintain the periodontium also, the occlusion and the tooth position, and to protect the tooth against fracture. Mechanically, it should resist the function and load within this week or 2 weeks, resist the removal, and must maintain the inter-abutment alignment, prevent the tilting of the abutment. Aesthetically, should have aesthetically acceptable color and good contour and translucency and color stability in order to mimic the anterior teeth. The materials used for temporary crown. The temporary crowns may be direct or indirect. The temporary crowns may be the temporary crowns are divided mainly into ready-made and custom made. The ready-made, it means it is preformed, such as like these crowns, preformed and ready to be adjusted gingivally and placed over the prepared tooth. The material this is called the cellulose acetate, This is called polycarbonate. These are metallic, maybe aluminum, and maybe tin, maybe stainless steel. The metal may be non-anatomic, like these cylinders. Maybe anatomic, it means that it has tooth anatomy. The need for a temporary bridge is needed when we have a prolonged treatment time, a long span. We have excessive lateral forces. We have strong masticatory function, and we have a history of a breakage. It means when the patient have occlusal load and a previous fracture is seen in the temporary bridge, so a good or high strength temporary bridge must be done. The custom-made restoration, it means that the restoration or the temporary crown is made specially for this tooth and specially for this case. This can be made on the patient mouth, that means direct, or made and constructed on the working cast, that it means the indirect restoration. The direct restoration is constructed in the patient mouth. We take impression before preparation, remove the excess, and after preparation we place a separating medium on the tooth, and we mix the temporary restoration material. The custom-made temporary restoration is made from acrylic, polymethyl methacrylate material. Mainly it is a white acrylic, or maybe in shades to mimic the anterior and mimic the color of teeth. And when the mix of the acrylic reach the doughy stage, we can be placed on the impression and attached to prepared tooth to construct the temporary restoration, that then it can be finished, polished, and cemented on the prepared teeth using temporary cementation material, which is zinc oxide eugenol impression material. This direct procedure have disadvantages. It use long churn time. It means that all the time that material set and the preparation and the construction of the temporary restoration, all that time the patient is sitting on the chair time in the clinic and take a large time, and discomfort and tiredness of the patient may be seen. Also, it subject dental pulp to the heat of the acrylic when it is set, and chemical irritation of monomer found in acrylic when it is set. So these two agents may do irritation for dental pulp. And dimensional stages can be seen because we remove the temporary crown in the rubbery stage from patient mouth because of the heat. It is removed from the patient mouth and complete the setting in the impression material, so dimensional changes can be done and distortion may be seen, so unfitness in the restoration. To avoid these disadvantages, we can do the temporary restoration on the working cast. It means we give appointment for the patient for the next day for 24 hours and construct the temporary restoration on the working cast. There is no contact of monomer and no heat and irritation to the dental pulp. And marginal fitness will be better. The cast will be stored in the clinic if in case of replacement and fracture of the temporary restoration. It can be redone easily. These were the advantages of the indirect procedure. The procedure also is summarized by taking the impression before preparation. After preparation, we take the impression and pour. We take two impression poured and sent to the laboratory, and impression from which the master cast is constructed and on which the temporary bridge can be placed. Sometimes we use this type of template to give the outer form of the restoration that made by special vacuum devices, to give the outer form that will be filled with acrylic and from which construction of temporary restoration can be done. The temporary restoration from acrylic is finished and polished and placed on the prepared teeth using the temporary cementation material. The temporary cementation material is zinc oxide agenol because the agenol have sedative effect to the pulp and mechanically acceptable, have moderate strength and moderate mechanical properties that it can be removed easily in the insertion visit. These were the impression technique and the construction of temporary restoration and the end of the first clinical stage in construction of the bridge. After that, the laboratory stage will take a few days for construction of the restoration. And after the construction, the second clinical stage will be done in a clinic by the drying and the cementation of the restoration. Thank you, dear dental students, and goodbye.